Chapter 1. The beautiful Koyuki Kazuna, the army of the country of spring, was waiting in the port for the ship that would come from the Empire of the Rising Sun, and to say that the woman was dying of nerves would actually be to say an understatement, and a very big one no less. She was at least 3 levels above the nerves. It was not for less after all. Shioi Todoroki, the manager of the White Lotus trading house in her country, had assured her that the tournament would feature the distinguished presence of the emperor himself and at least 1 or 2 of his wives as well as his favorite daughter. And for that same reason he was scared to death, as everyone in the elemental continent knew that this place was wild and inhospitable. Just to think that a single man had managed not only to raise a people of simple potters, conquered 6 other kingdoms, to found a powerful nation, and on top of that, to be involved in the mother war of all wars, coming out victorious. And not only that, but he had managed to what was thought impossible, to completely pacify the great outside world. Imagining such a good man, the closest thing she could think of was the being out of her own nightmares, no matter how much the manager assured her otherwise. If she herself had affirmed that he was a rather cold man as a general rule, but he was not a monster, even if he was a mountain of muscles almost 2 meters high. In fact, he could even be considered a gentle and noble man in certain respects, not to mention that he was an incredibly handsome man, even if the way she dressed made about fashion. In addition to the Dharmiya herself, next to her were Tsunade, her assistant Shizune, and Shiri herself, who was currently the target of the eyes of a good part of all those present, and the occasional passerby. The woman in question was a young woman who could not be more than about 25 years old. She had heterochromatic eyes, being one brown and the other trilent blue, and hair that was half red and half albino. Although that was something that would attract the attention of almost everyone, the truth is that her outfit was much more striking. After all, she wore navy blue short skirt, matching sneakers, black tights, and a black top that exposed her flat stomach. She looked incredibly beautiful, don't get it wrong, but that wasn't the kind of attire someone would wear in a climate that was currently around 12 degrees below zero in the middle of winter. In fact, it was the attire someone would wear for a rather tropical climate in summer. How can you dress like this in this weather? Finally, after he couldn't fight his curiosity anymore, Shizune asked the question that everyone had in mind. "Inheritance from my mother and father," replied the girl with her two-tone hair with her monotonous toning with a shrug of the shoulders. "Half of my body is capable of withstanding temperatures even below this. This is inherited from my mother, while the other half is so hot that for me it is fresh all the time. That comes from father. I think you could say that I have a double-kept cage in your terms, because the cold half of my body can generate ice and the right one generates burning flames, and I can use a coal fire if I use my 2 halves at the same time. The emperor calls it exotic." That answer actually surprised both Shizune and her mentor quite a bit. Neither of them expected these to have a surprise like that. It wasn't much longer since their explanation, when everyone heard the powerful engines of the Imperial vehicle above them, and indeed when they looked up at the sky about a kilometer away they noticed how there was something suspended in the air. It was at least 400 meters in the air, if not more. The perspective was playing tricks on them. From what the girl next to him was telling them was a mobile intelligent space of operations, meant to never remain static in one place to prevent pockets of insurrection from detecting it, and also to help war-torn areas get back on their feet. Much to everyone's relief, they had only used the 4 for the second use so far, though he conveniently chose not to tell them that it was because insurgent groups were destroyed as soon as they were discovered by one of the kings of heaven or any of the other warriors of the empire. They certainly didn't need to know about the empire's internal problems after all. Finally, the gigantic ship water if it could apparently move so much in sea, air, land, who would have thought? And soon he began to sail until he was a little less than 200 meters from the port, along with his gigantic escort fleet. When everything was calm, the huge doors of the vehicle opened, giving way to a small frigate where the emperor and his 2 wives who signed up for this expedition were going, as well as the fighters of the tournament. The entire show showed the actress and her companions. 10 minutes later the emperor got off the boat, showing the monstrous level of strength that the man possessed. At the same moment he put a single foot on the wood of the port, which cracked at his mere presence. Shortly after, his family and the rest of the members of the empire's entourage came down, and I swear to hear one of them say that I was not paying for the repair of the port. But going back to the topic of the emperor, I now understood why Shioi claimed that the emperor and fashion were not friends. The man was dressed quite strangely, and he was sure that what he had around his shoulders was definitely women's clothes. In fact, the only accessory that certainly fit him was the white and red bandage that he had tied around his eyes. As for her companions, except for the metal helmet with something she assumed was skin on the head of the younger one, they dressed relatively normally, at least normal for warrior women, or a prime minister in the case of the black-haired man who swore that he was the one who said he was not paying for the repair of the port. Your Highness, it is an honor to be in your presence. Koyuki greeted with a slight bow to the man who was now considered the most powerful man in the world. The honor is all mine. The man returned the gesture with a bow. She would swear that she had heard his voice before, but that was something she chose not to investigate. After all, she had met many people who had a similar voice timbre and honestly couldn't remember them all even if she wanted to, not to mention that he doubted that this man was an acquaintance of his considering his history. Meet my friend and medical program director, Tsunotsuneju. Koyuki made the introductions that unbeknownst to her were completely unnecessary. Tsunotsuneju, a doctor of such a reputation that she has left the best doctors in my world with a desire to meet her, although that is something that could be fixed. It was not an empty compliment by any means. The doctors of his kingdom were impressed that he achieved so much on a continent where electricity was considered a novelty, and not the norm. Tsuno didn't really have a fucking idea as how or why the people of the Empire knew about her and honestly weren't sure they wanted to find out, and the fact that he had flattered the woman implied that the woman was in the Emperor's good books, which they didn't know, at least at the time. It caused a certain pervert to feel like his days were numbered. Back to the important thing, the Emperor presented his two wives in the over-edited sugar ball that he was pleased to call daughter, with those exact words, as well as the man who in every way was his brother in everything but blood, as well as each and every one of the fighters of the Empire, who, while the Emperor went to the feudal palace, were led by Shiori to his place of lodging. And of course, the cold-hearted beauty actually almost couldn't help but feel sorry for Konoha's, or any village seeing the bloodlust most of them had. At least they had been lucky that Pickle had chosen that it was a good time to hibernate, or they would have had to deal with a cannibalistic primitive beast even though something inside him was telling him that they had actually put the man to sleep to avoid a diplomatic incident, most likely to the slight disappointment of the Emperor himself. Sometimes he wondered if man was not secretly a god of vengeance, or something like that. Gel was considered by the way to be the god of war, so it would not be unreasonable because of how the gods work that he was actually also the god of vengeance. XXXXX. 2 days later, registrations for the tournament. Many did not know why it had been allowed, but due to the sponsor, the rules for this tournament had been modified to a great extent. Normally in the tournament there used to be 32 participants who would be chosen in a previous elimination round. However, this year there were only 16 places since the other 16 had been ceded directly to the fighters of the Empire. Also, and for some reason that no one understood, there was an age limit for the contestants, located to the great frustration of many of the inhabitants of the elemental nation, between 15 and 27 years of age, curiously only 2 years older than the Emperor from what many understood. However, only with that restriction the best cards of Konoha, such as Giri, Kushina, Hiroshi, Tosum, Kakashi Minato himself have been left out of the tournament, as well as Haniroshi Abiwa, or Kumazone with his brother and Jinkuriki. So to Konoha's slight concern, his fate fell on the young shoulders of Maya, Shio, Hashirama and Mito Namikaze, the sons of Hokage, Hinata, Hanabi and Jahikiwa, Rock Lee, Kid Musica, Sasukuchaya, and Maru Sarutobi, formerly known as Konohamaru, who, with the support of his mother, the now 20-year-old Genin, had legally changed his name because he was disgusted by a name related to a nest of treacherous rats. It doesn't matter, even so, Konoha will take the victory, exclaimed Mito, who was really excited at the prospect of being able to demonstrate her ability and potential. The 18-year-old was actually burning with desire to kick a few imperial asses, to at least earn some of Maru's respect. Things between the Namikaze family and what was left of the 12 of Konoha, as they called themselves, was not exactly pleasant. In fact, quite the opposite. Mei, the younger brother of Naruto, was very insistent in asking Hinata for a date, who had rejected him in every way imaginable, and some that he had invented only to be able to make it as clear as possible. Many, although they did not like the comparison, it was almost like remembering the constant rejections that Sakura received when she tried to woo Sasuke without a clan. Only with something a little worse in the mix, because there were a couple of times in which Hinata had hit the young man an inch from his life without him being able to get the message, to the disgrace of the young man and annoyance of Kushina and Shio. This had happened during their combat in the Chunin exams the year after the banishment, where Hinata had crushed the call by her parents, and for no one else. Predajo Namikaze, and for a certain level of vindication of Jerry, or not so much due to the more than different circumstances of the fight in question. The young prodigy Hikiwa had been the one who defeated his twin sister Shio, who had fallen in love with young Jerry. Not that that was ever going to happen. To begin with, Jerry had the blessing of his uncle to date his teammate Tenden, in addition to the fact that the prodigy Hikiwa couldn't even stand being in the same room as her for more than 5 minutes. That day, after crushing Maria, Hinata saw the haughty and defiant as a certain black-haired young woman had done in the past towards the Hawkage box, almost as if he were saying to them, "Is this why you left him behind?" Mei couldn't be more different from his brother even if he tried. He could dye his jet black hair like Naruto had done all his life. He could hide his eyes behind his hit eye like his brother would have, and still he wouldn't be anywhere near being like his brother. Naruto was aloof, it's true, but he was always polite. Mei was conceited. Naruto helped those who deserved his help even if he didn't like you. Mei was petulant. Naruto was tenacious, brave, and despite everything he would never give up on anything, being willing to give it his all. Mei was cowardly, and if things didn't go 100% in his favor he tended to give up. And for the test to be done, it was enough for Hinata to hit him twice an inch into his life for Mei to surrender. Especially sad and pathetic if you took into account that he had a much greater offensive arsenal than his brother, and even so he was not able to do anything against a kunoichi of the same clan who was said to be unsurpassed in taijutsu. Again sad considering that Naruto outplayed Jerry in a taijutsu fight and Jerry was superior to Hinata in every aspect. The only good thing that came out of that battle is that Hinata was able to take it out on him. Every ounce of anger and frustration he felt was released in the fight. Half a year after her return, she and basically everyone else had learned that of the triplets only Naruto had a minimum real ability to have been able to control the Kyuubi due to his body replacing the special Kepker that Kushina had inside, while her brothers being half-breeds between Uzumaki and a simple civilian. Powerful yes, but a civilian at the end of the day. They did not have the special Kepker that Kushina possessed, so they could not access the Kyuubi without completely losing themselves in anger, allowing the beast to take control of their bodies. In other words, they abandoned Naruto for Hinata, and because of it, and following the village policy and take it out on those who did not fear it, Mei became an Hinata scapegoat. Shio was also crushed without much trouble by Jerry, and a couple of years later Hanbin, to the surprise of many don'ts who had become stronger than one would expect from him, had managed to humiliate the two younger Namikaze brothers, thereby showing the family that they had bet on the wrong horse. After all, Naruto, while he might have lost in battles against better prepared opponents, at least he wouldn't give up until at least, and in his words spoken to Zabuza on his time, "I may die here today, but at least I'll take you with me to hell." Then Gata broke his contract with said man, and the rest is history. As for the rest, well, the relationship between Lee and his teammates was never the same again and was retreated by them, even with Gear's many attempts to reconnect them. A similar situation occurred in Teams 10 and 8 with Kid and Ano, although that was a little worse since the dissidents did not forgive the sensei for their actions either. As for Sasuke and Sakura, well, Sasuke was a grade 1 and Sakura was his faithful lap puppy. Besides, no one wanted anything to do with the clanless, something that Njet especially enjoyed reminding him. After all, most of Sasuke's ego came from being an Uchiha, which he was no longer now. Brave words, spoken by a loser. Maru simply couldn't help but cut through the Namikaze's illusions, even if he had no idea that she wanted to score points with him with those words, and just wanted to take her down from her pedestal. "Konohamaru, that's no way to talk to the Hokage's daughter," he reprimanded Asuma. "You didn't bite your tongue, Uncle Asuma," Maru replied with venom from her voice. After all, it was well known that Asuma had spoken sharper and hurtful words to Naruto in his time. Also, unlike others, my words come from the truth. After all, she has never defeated Megi or Hanabi, so things for what they are. No one could argue with that logic, or rather they didn't want to, since they didn't really need to make a scene, so they simply went to the registration site where they signed up with as few incidents as possible, only to then separate to look for a place to stay, without much luck for most of them, it must be said. XXXXX the next day, those registered in the tournament prepared to go to compete. They had all arrived early at the arena where the preliminaries would take place. Once inside, a very pretty woman with black hair and amber eyes explained the rules. However, her eyes were not exactly what caught their attention, even if they were quite pretty. What really caught his attention, besides the red cap and his more than perfect body, was that he had black cat ears on his head and a kind of belt that to many looked like two equally black tails wrapped around his waist. Alright, this year we have a record attendance from what I've been told, and I want to go take a nap so I'll be quick. Her voice was surprisingly sensual for someone who clearly didn't want to be there. Due to the number of participants we have, we're going to divide them into blocks. Just as he said that, a beat sounded in his ear and soon after, he simply had to sigh. I'm not going to see most of them again, why do I have to introduce myself? Courtesy is for Diplomat Shiro-chan. Well, you win. Many were hit by a drag because of the one-sided fight that was taking place between the woman and that Shiro. Well, since my little sister thinks I should be formal, the name is Krukatejo. I will be the head judge of this part of the tournament to avoid controversies and that. Now the damn rules. Yes, clearly a woman who loved her job. Unbeknownst to them, people in the Empire actually found the globally broadcast scene terribly funny, hence why her younger sister would have reprimanded her. After all, the public rarely likes a presenter who is clearly bigger. Due to the number of people, they will have a time limit to 10 minutes. If there is no clear winner, both leave. Of course, the protests did not take long to arrive, however, a look from their bright eyes was enough to silence them. The use of any kepkagenkai is also prohibited. Again, more protests. Oh, be thankful we made it weepy. Many of the Imperials have familiar techniques that destroy at the atomic level. And that was enough to silence them. Certainly with what was known about that place in hell, that was credible and a fortune that they were not allowed to use them. Obviously for similar reasons the use of weapons or jutsu is not allowed. Also, and although it is not penalized, we ask you not to kill. This is being broadcast live and their children watching it. I don't know why this is legally rated R. Nude beef came to his voice. What do you mean it's not R? It's guys beating each other. For Kinsaka, Shiro, people have lost eyes and ears in this before. And they all chose to ignore the girl and her argument with Shiro, mainly because they weren't understanding shit of what she was saying right now. 10 minutes later the discussion came to an end and finally Kuroka resumed the explanation. Getting this back on track, if your opponent surrenders, falls off the platform, is unconscious, if your injuries prevent you from continuing, or we detect that you're cheating, you will be out and that's it. And believe me, they chose me as a judge because I can see things that many others cannot see, and since the Emperor himself supports me, my decision is unappealable, although they're forcing me to be impartial. For some reason that no one understood, he had said it while looking towards Konoha. Nonetheless, everyone else nodded in understanding, all having the idea that it would be very, very difficult to run a spot in this tournament. Now, we'll draw them in order of registration in one of the 8 blocks for the fights. Only the finalists of each block will go to the final round, where in the order of the block they will be assigned a number. The winners of block 1 are the finalists 1 and 2 and so on until we reach the 16 places. Once that's done, on the day of the tournament, you'll be paired to fight against the fighters of the Rising Sun Empire who have obtained the same number as you. With this I end his explanation. Doubts? She ignored the arms that had been raised. They did not pay her for this. It's okay, they just didn't even want the job to begin with. They had given it to them because you're pretty, and your dry comments will amuse the audience. And the one who was in a bad mood actually helped those dry comments. The fact that a younger sister cut her off in the middle of a sentence on several occasions also helped, of course. XXXXX. There were more participants than Kuroka herself had thought they were, about 310 plus dozens less, but she didn't want to count them in. Honestly, it wasn't her job to keep records of who participated and who didn't. But back to the subject, due to the frankly ridiculous amount of participants, in which the natives of Konoha really had a very bad as it is the talk of both the judges of each block and the fighters, and in general of the city itself. In fact, the situation reached such a point that in the hostel where they were staying they cut off their water and electricity. In the restaurants they denied them the service, and where they finally decided to serve them they charged them triple alleging idiot tax or any other ridiculous tax that they wanted to charge them and that they could not refuse to pay, since oh surprise there was a Heavenly King prowling the city. To make sure that there were no problems being said Heavenly King no less than the damn Zaraftradnail, and the man simply told them pay or go away if I really can't and don't want to do anything for you because of the grudge of the people that one day you will hopefully forget had especially hurt the Namikaze couple. After all those, without the man knowing, they were exactly the same words that the Hokage had said to his son many times, and thinking about it only made them sadder as they had to think about how much he had to suffer and endure without going crazy. Which continued the vicious cycle as it only made them sadder. Fortunately for Konoha, they showed that they were still one of the peoples with the most powerful shinobi and that they still had the specialty in taijutsu par excellence, because they were the shinobi nation with the most contestants in the final, the result being quite promising for Konoha. With Kida, Jay, Maya, Maru, Shio, Lee, and Sess, they had a total of 7 wrestlers in the tournament. The Hikio sisters and the 2 younger Namikaze had narrowly missed out, or simple bad luck of matching. Hinata was simply unlucky to face Njay in one of the first rounds, and Hanabi, with him in Hinata's words, Lee's brute animal. Maru had actually had luck in her favor. After all, she had beaten Hashirama like a punching bag, unknowingly, to the great amusement of certain blindfolded Blackhair, while Mito had trusted his abilities and lost at an early stage to Shizuka, whom he already hated for having called his brother Maya pathetic. It was simply unfair, everyone comparing his brother to his other brother, who was, in simple terms, a true power monster, even if his Kepko was rare. Now returning to the subject of Shizuka, a few years ago, she and her bodyguard Takuwa came to the village so that the frog Sanin could fulfill a certain promise he had lost, and challenged his apprentice Meta to a fight, which he lost, by the way. At the end of that fight, he had disdainfully demanded to fight the prodigy trained by Sanin. Although training was a very strong word for what Jiraiya had done for Naruto, it was to be very nice of the old green. Going back to the subject, if he didn't fight with Naruto, then they had to pay a penalty. Due to obvious reasons, he had to do just that reluctantly. As for the promise that the Sanin had made to them, suffice it to say that Kushina had almost beaten him to death for making that promise without his consent. Although, to be fair, that promise was made before he was Minato's teacher, and he really could not have seen this whole situation coming. Not to say that she had genuinely forgotten about the promise. Leaving that aside, hence she had a grudge against the beautiful Amazon, although something inside told her that she would get along quite well with her brother Naruto. Virtually half of the participants in the Hidden Nation are from the village. Kakashi smiled when he saw that 7 of the participants in the final round were from the Land of Fire, and due to the age restriction that would undoubtedly make it clear to the other shinobi powers that Konoha was still alive in the game. It's a pity that you had to face each other in preliminary rounds. Little did they know that this had actually been quite on purpose. After all, the Emperor didn't want his savage brutes to hurt people who hadn't really done anything to him, although Mito and Hashirama were simply lucky to benefit from this fact. Even if that is the case, I am concerned about the fact that we do not know who they will fight in the first round. Shikamaru, being the pragmatic guy, couldn't help but make his point of view of the whole situation known. Some of the other fighters have a certain reputation, like Daru of Kunlaw, or Rays of Aim. Against them we can devise ways to win, but in the Empire, we only have rumors of their fighters, and we are not sure who they are. True. However, Hashirama, the youngest of the Namikaze brothers, could not help but disdain Nara's concerns. But as long as my brothers fight, they'll win the tournament. You know, making fun of you was funny, now it's just annoying and sad. Maru didn't even bother to try to tease anymore, because there were only so many times you could make fun of someone's stupidity before even that became annoying. Even if we ignore the fact that 25 years gave some of them time to fight in the Unification War, Shizuka is fighting in this tournament and she already beat up your brother years ago, and I doubt she was sitting on her butt all this time, so I wouldn't count on them, frankly speaking. Maru, I'm already starting to get fed up with that disdain for my children. And certainly Kushina was already quite fed up with Maru's behavior and his constant lack of respect for her and their children from the boy. I don't know what kind of manners your mother instilled in you, but I'll teach you some if not. If you're going to teach me to abandon my child like garbage, you can save yourself the talk. Unbeknownst to the boy, in the palace of the daimyo, a certain black-haired man had actually felt the urge to hit someone right now. Not because of the insult to his mother, but for indirectly calling him trash, again. So far, I have limited myself to telling the truth that hurting them is not my problem, and to be honest, those who have the best chance of winning are Jerry, Ropley and myself, since we specialize in taijutsu. That was a truth that they couldn't really deny. Not that they could deny any of the child's truths, because the reason why it hurt them was because they were always the crudest and harshest absolute truth. And even though his clan wasn't based on using that art, since he disowned basically each and every one of his clan's traditions and being a hypocrite. After all, the true fire such as the one the first 2 Hokage truly valued would never allow an innocent to suffer as the other 2 had done. For that reason, and although he knew elemental jutsu, it was just stupid not to know. Hell, even Jer had a few in his repertoire in case of emergency. He just refrained from using the ones created by his clan and had been training in taijutsu with Jerry, managing to become a very good taijutsu master of the monkey and drunken fist styles, the latter to his mother's great disapproval, but he calmed down when he found out that unlikely he could use it without having to be drunk. Faced with the new verbal hook, Krishna simply had to shut up again, something that was sadly becoming routine, especially when talking to those who had seen her son as a true friend, or in Maru's case a mentor. Well, I propose that we celebrate that 7 of our players have entered the tournament. Jorai was really just trying to disperse the more than awkward moment that Maru's attack on Krishna had left. I just received this month's royalty payment, and even though there are many of us, there must at least be one concession stand where we can celebrate. It hurt him quite a bit in his false pride to say that, but because of the treatment they were given, he had no doubt that this money would not last long anywhere. Hence, if they wanted to save something, they should celebrate at one of the smaller stalls. And when he had gone to an audience with the young Damia to complain about the abusive treatment they were being given, not only was she unlucky that the Heavenly King Zarathustra was there, so the idea of influencing her was ruined, but she herself had also told him unceremoniously that she was making them feel at home because that is the way her village treats heroes, so they had no choice but to endure the abuse if they really wanted to take the cash prize home. And speaking of audiences, thanks to his small incursion into the palace, he had learned, and with it everyone else, that the emperor had arrived a few days before the preliminaries began, to do a little sightseeing with 2 of his wives and his fierce brother, as well as to review the situation of the commercial house in the country. Obviously many had tried to get an audience with the man, but they were all denied by his elder brother King Zarf. After all, if the man granted an audience, then he should grant them all, and according to the man himself, this was a pleasure trip to get to know the scenery and enjoy the tournament, not for business. And from what his few spies on the ground had managed to tell him, including Koyuki, hadn't talked to him about anything beyond a petty business matter between the 2 nations, and he was not even referring to the empire in its entirety, but to his country of origin, China, of which he was still king. In addition to remaining the emperor of the known world, and Koyuki was the host of the event. However, since the emperor was not only the most powerful man in the world undisputedly, and that his brother was known not only as the dark magician but also as the magician of death, no one really wanted to bother the king. Although from what he had heard, if an audience was wanted, Zarf would be more than willing to schedule an appointment for any time after the Unification Festival, since before that his younger brother's schedule was full. He was sure he was lying, but he wouldn't argue with death magic. XXXXX, Feudal Palace. 8 days ago, the Dharmia invited the emperor along with the royal family and the participants of the tournament to a gala dinner where everyone ate and had a great time. This dinner, of course, had also been attended by the managers of the trading house, because obviously, in addition to Shiori herself, her older brother Tulia had been appointed as the woman's bodyguard. Needless to say, like his sister, he wore clothes that didn't fit at all with the weather, only that he showed less skin. Apparently his body was specifically designed to withstand the cold, but he was extremely weak to heat, particularly sad when you consider that its offensive power was the blue flame, a particularly hot fire. Fortunately for the man, the medical technology of the Empire made it possible for man to heal himself whenever they became bad enough to be noticeable. That had only made the man in his good books. After all, he genuinely cared about the health of all his subjects, even if some of them had special conditions like the white-haired young man had, who according to his own sister before that had not had a good appearance, while now he was quite good-looking. When the dinner was finally over, the fighters went to their hotel to rest from the long journey, while the emperor and his family went out exclusively in the company of the Sanin, his assistant, and the Daimyo, to take an evening walk in the palace garden, which was quite beautiful at night. "Can I ask you a question?" La Sanin started the conversation a little more timidly than she would have liked. "We all have the right to do them, and we all have the right not to respond." The emperor's voice was calm, making it clear that she could ask the questions she wanted, but answering or not was entirely up to her will. "Why are you always so ambiguous?" The first queen, a woman with beautiful golden hair and green eyes, asked her husband, who simply shrugged his shoulders. He himself did not know why he spoke that way. "Have you ever come across a child with blue eyes shining like stars?" The question could be very specific. After all, eyes as those were unique, and if he asked it, it was for 2 reasons. Number 1. Black was one of the most common hair colors in the world, if not the most common. Distinguishing a single individual of those characteristics in a world thousands of times larger than the elemental nation was directly impossible, and too she had been present when Jiraiya had informed them that Naruto had jumped the Great Wall, and since the familiar Teketsu Uchiha still bore his name, she hoped that the Emperor had met him, hoped that the actress and Shizune also shared. The Emperor for his part simply hummed for a few moments as he looked at his wives and his best friend having a sort of silent conversation with each other. Why do you want to know about Naruto Uchiha? Finally, Erdtree chose to ask the first question. We certainly know where he is, but given the way they saw him in his village, I don't think they'll look for him for anything good. Erdtree had always been the closest to Naruto, the most stubborn to never leave him alone as well, and although he himself had told her that Tsunade was always kind to him, Iruka Mino had done the same and turned out to be little more than a dirty, vile, and miserable traitor. And that's why she wouldn't trust anyone who was from Konoha. Which is why she brought the nuclear bomb with tips to this mission, better known as Neely Direct, who, although it hurt her pride, was much more powerful than herself and had a bad temper, so her philosophy was, kill them first, finish them off later and find out at some point in the future if you remember. It should be said that until now the third part had never happened. Naruto Uchiha would have been treated as a hero if he had come to take refuge from that ungrateful village. Koyuki intervened, earning what appeared to be a raised eyebrow from the Emperor. For me, he is my hero and a grave friend. He is also for several people. If he has the idea that it is not like that, he is wrong. I know that soon would have received him with open arms, just like the waves, the birds, the uncle, the moon or the springs. If he knows where he is, if he knows him, and he asked her not to say anything about where he lives, we understand and we will never insist that he tell us, but please, at least he could tell us if he is okay. The Emperor showed no expression, something that was noticed by both the Sannin and the actress and our companions. Of course, he knew from the bottom of his heart that during his exile his friends from other peoples and countries would not abandon him, but he would not endanger them out of a selfish desire to belong. He had few friends, and that is why he valued them more than his own life. That is why he had asked Fury, his director of the Intelligence Center with such a long name that they had left him in the acronym of SHIELD, to infiltrate as the White Madman's trading house to simply keep them watched and cared for at all times. A king's strength rested on his people, and a friend used all his strength to protect his true friends, and Naruto was everyone's best friend. At least in Zeref's words, and speaking as such. Oh okay, and he's the luckiest, unluckiest and annoying bastard I know. Zeref said with a sigh, filling the women with hope and bringing a small smile to their faces as he heard the affectionate way in which the Emperor's hand referred to the now man. I also want you amo crazy immortal Eliconero suicide. The Emperor replied by causing the women to choke with a cry of surprise. He didn't take off the blindfold. He didn't like to do it. He just lifted the right side of it slightly to allow Tsunade herself to see that bright star-like eye she had seen once 10 years ago. An eye that he could never forget in his life. And why unfortunate? Elfrieden incident. Naruto didn't have time to respond to that. Nah, Naruto. Because before he could do it, Sannin practically hugged him tightly and kept him in that grip for a while. I should feel jealous. I asked the tallest and longest-haired queen to her shorter-haired, shorter-stature namesake. She's old enough to be her grandmother, so I don't think so. Erdtree whispered quietly. After all, you should never mess with a woman's age. Plus this scene was pretty cute. It was a shame she didn't have a camera right now. Little did she know that near the wall a certain gal, a fan of Naruto, had been following them for several hours and taking photos in the best moments of the man. XXXXX when Tsunade finally let go of the Hagen after the proper introductions, and of Mordred's befriending the now called Sir Taunton of Camelot. Much to Erdtree's dismay and the amusement of the other three members of the Empire, the adults had caught up, in several respects. To begin with, the matter that Naruto had actually led to them in a way by revealing that he actually had better training that he didn't show anyone, as they tried to kill him when they thought he was weak and didn't want to have to deal with the consequences if they found out that he was stronger than even some of Konoha's low-level genin at that time. None of them could really blame him for hiding his true strength, even if Koyuki had bothered him a bit to learn that he could have actually turned out his uncle's problem without much trouble. They for their part told him about how Konoha had been suffering since his departure, not that he was very affected by it. In fact, he was only worried about the Ichiraki family, but they were sure that they would do something to help them if things got really bad. Another thing they told him was how with the help of Sanin, Koyuki had demanded payment for having stayed for a week in the best spa in his country. Something that left him quite puzzled. At least until they explained to him that, in addition to the classified missions from D2S, there are some missions that typically do not appear in the Academy's teaching, which are the X and R rank missions. Although Zaref told them very frankly that prostitution with a client was not a real mission, even if they were authorized by the shinobi in question and the confidentiality agreement was signed, Naruto had to agree with that and in fact wondered if he was not a product of one of those missions. After all, there were rare cases of twins from different fathers and he certainly does not dye his hair, and was very different from his brothers. The R missions, on the other hand, were more of a kind of reward, and Naruto had no qualms about saying it. These basically consisted of a customer extremely satisfied with a mission and gave compensation to the shinobi who in the past performed a mission for him. And she had sponsored an R-class mission, where it was paid for the entire 7 team to go spend a week relaxing at the best spa in the country, free of charge for them, of course. However, Kakashi, Sakura and Sasuke without a clan had vilely deceived Naruto. Not that he had believed them, however he preferred not to have much to do with them outside of the missions. Even if Tenzo, an Anbu captain and close friend of Kakashi, was a good liar, they had tried to make him believe that they would go on a specialized mission that required them in Anbu himself, while Tengu had tasked another Anbu to keep Naruto busy with D-rank missions under the pretext that they were missing from his quest log. Not that the kid had obeyed the Anbu in the slightest by telling him it's not my problem if the idiots can't mow their fucking lawn by themselves, which was virtually a nuisance to the single Anbu who intended to use them to do their jobs. They didn't want to do it themselves, and since Tsunade wasn't heroism, they couldn't do anything to force him to work without pay. The daimyo was told that Naruto went to a festival in the Land of Waves as a guest of honor because he had also saved them, but they had not been invited, and that is why he had chosen to go to the Land of the Waves and had been kind enough to give his place to Tenzo. It was not a license. Naruto had told them that since he did not plan to work for free with the Anbu, he had gone to the Land of the Waves to visit the old Tazna, and it just so happened that he arrived in the middle of a festival by pure chance, which is why the incident was not discovered until much later, since she had not been foolish enough to blindly believe in a ninja. They were liars by nature after all. However, when Sanin arrived in spring, they both noticed when talking that a deception had occurred, since the main beneficiary had not gone because of a deceptive lie, even if ironically he had spent a fairly pleasant week in another country by simple coincidence. Even so, Koyuki sent an invoice to stay of the living, and went to Konoha to demand payment for the stay. Of course, Sakura and Sasuke, by them without clan, claimed that they deserved the vacation, but the feudal reminded them in great detail that Sakura was more of a nuisance on that occasion and that Sasuke did not do anything significant, and Naruto had not only done most of the work, so because they had left aside the true hero of their country, they had to pay the bill for his sojourn, with interest, of course. Interest that he regretted not making compounded when Naruto explained to him how they worked and how he used that to keep his biggest opponents in check, who were indebted to him or his associates. Koyuki had to give it to him. The boy was a born politician, even if he wasn't corrupt. As for the bill, of course, the Minato had forced those involved in the matter to pay, seeing just one more of the many injustices that had been done to Naruto and the village. There was everything on that list, from withholding 60% of his payments for missions because it was the demonic tax to charge him for living in a city hole that was his home. It's not that he had ever paid rent once he told his supposed landlord that maybe no one would want to live where the demon boy lived, or the exorbitant prices at which they sold him things. For Minato to find out that his team had stabbed him in such a way was a particularly hard blow. For Naruto, not so much. It was something that had actually been expected. Returning to the subject, they had divided the account equally among all those involved in the scam. It had taken them about 4 years to pay their share due to the deterioration in the economy due to the drop in the missions, added to the interest that he now regretted that they had been simple and not compounded from the invoice of the invoice, which had originally been 250,000 Rio but had grown to 2.5 million. Oh, the thought that compound interest would have been at least double or even triple made her want to go back in time to tell her past self how they worked. The fact that Naruto had to tap Neil when she was about to speak made him think that it was actually possible, but it would have consequences. As for the matter of the debt, this had been quite bad for Tenzo, who was not close to anyone and still could not pay his share, something that made Naruto suggest innocently clear to him that he informed him that for non-payment the debt would charge him an annual compound interest of 5%, backed, of course, by the White Lotus and therefore the Empire. If he wasn't married, she could have kissed him right there, not that his wives would have avoided it. However, as for Kakashi, he actually lived off the charity of Gary, Asuma, and Kurenai. Naruto whimpering at that last name was something that caught Koyuki's attention, and I knew there was a reason why I didn't want the name said by the man only made her have even more doubts. Sakura, on the other hand, still lived with her parents because she didn't have the money to become independent, and Sasuke, well, even if he didn't have access to the funds of the Uchiha clan controlled by Itachi no less, the people of the village kissed his ass and paid the debt for him, and let him sleep and eat wherever he wanted completely free. When the story ended, Naruto told them about his journey east. Quick summary: the wall is to keep Westerners out when they were weak and didn't have the technology to go through it like they did now, of course, and it wasn't designed with the intention of preventing the shinobi from coming out. That is, he simply climbed the wall and then lowered it by sliding on a damn surfboard that an apparent extreme sports business had facilitated when he saw a shinobi with X climbing the damn wall for the first time in 20 years. Hold on, what he meant by that? Tsuno asked. Of course, he believed the boy. Damn, he was a terrible liar. That's why he believed him when he told him that the shinobi didn't go to the wall out of fear and the outsiders because they didn't give a fuck about this continent until now, and that's just because of his association with Naruto. But what was that in 20 years? That's a longer story. Naruto muttered before telling them about one of their Sky Kings, whom they nicknamed the Redhead. End of the chapter.